8:14 in the morning, the Gulf of Oman. The USS Hampton moved silently through the dark water at 60 meters depth. This was not a standard transit of the region. Usually, Iranian submarines remained within the shallow coastal shelf of the Persian Gulf, where their diesel-electric engines were most effective. Today, an Iranian Kilo-class vessel had crossed the maritime boundary into the deep water of the Arabian Sea. The American crew did not know if this was a navigational error or a deliberate provocation. The unanswered question was whether the two hunters could share such a narrow corridor without a collision. The ocean in the Gulf of Oman is a chaotic environment for acoustics. Thousands of commercial tankers and cargo ships pass through these waters every month. Their massive propellers create a constant wall of low-frequency noise. At 60 meters, the USS Hampton sat just below a sharp thermal layer. This layer of temperature change acted like a mirror for sound. It hid the submarine from surface sensors, but trapped noise beneath it, like a tunnel. 8:18 in the morning. 10 miles to the north, the Iranian submarine Yunes maintained a steady course. The Kilo-class boat is often called the Black Hole by Western navies because of its extreme silence when running on batteries. The Iranian captain relied on this stealth. He did not have the advanced digital sonar suites of the American vessel. He relied on patience and the natural clutter of the sea to mask his presence. Inside the Yunes, the air was heavy and smelled of recycled oxygen and hydraulic fluid. The crew moved with practiced caution. Every dropped wrench or slammed locker could be heard for miles underwater. 8:22 in the morning. In the sonar suite of the USS Hampton, a technician leaned toward his display. He adjusted his headset to filter out the rhythmic thumping of a nearby oil tanker. On his waterfall display, a faint NW's steady trace began to emerge from the background noise. It was a rhythmic pulse, nearly identical to the ambient sound of the ocean, but too consistent to be natural. The sonar supervisor spoke to the officer of the deck. "Sir, I have a possible submerged contact. Bearing 040. Signal strength is increasing." The officer of the deck responded. "Classify the contact." The supervisor studied the frequency lines. The broadband signature matches a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine. He is running on batteries. He is very quiet. The officer of the deck looked at the navigation chart. The two vessels were converging on a narrow point near the edge of the continental shelf. Maintain current depth and speed. Do not give him a reason to think we see him yet. 8:25 in the morning. Inside the Iranian submarine, the sonar operator felt a chill. He heard a faint, high-frequency hiss that did not belong to the merchant ships above. It was the sound of high-pressure water moving over a precision-machined hull. The operator spoke to the Iranian captain. "Captain, I have a flow noise. It is close, perhaps less than 2,000 meters." The captain stood behind the operator. "Is it a surface ship?" "No, Captain. The frequency is too high. It is a nuclear-powered vessel." The Iranian captain narrowed his eyes. He knew exactly what was in these waters. He did not order a turn. He did not order a change in depth. He wanted to see how close the side Americans would get before they flinched. The two submarines were now on a direct intercept course at 60 meters depth. Neither side was willing to yield the underwater lane. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:28 in the afternoon. Deep in the Gulf of Oman, the silence inside the USS Hampton was absolute. Every crew member on watch wore rubber-soled shoes. Every metal hatch was closed with a gentle touch. On a submarine, sound is the only currency. The American crew was currently spending theirs at a rate they did not like. At 5 knots, the Hampton was nearly silent, but the closing speed between them and the Iranian contact was accelerating. The commanding officer, Commander James Miller, stepped into the cramped sonar suite. The blue light of the screens reflected off his glasses. He looked at the waterfall display. It was a digital representation of sound over time. A thick line of noise from a surface tanker dominated the center, but off to the side, a thin, needle-like trace was growing more distinct. Miller spoke to the sonar supervisor. What is the latest range estimate? The supervisor did not look up from his screen. 1,400 yards, Captain. His bearing is steady. That means he is on a collision course. Can you hear his machinery? Negative, sir. He is still on batteries, but I am picking up a slight harmonic. It sounds like a misaligned pump on his cooling system. It is faint, but it is definitely him. 2:30 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian submarine Yunes, the atmosphere was different. The heat was rising. To save battery power, the captain had ordered the air conditioning to be turned down to the minimum setting. Sweat ran down the faces of the young sailors. In the torpedo room, they sat on narrow benches, surrounded by the heavy, green shapes of Russian-made wake-homing torpedoes. Captain Rezai stood in the center of the control room. He held a physical stopwatch in his hand. He was counting the seconds between the acoustic pulses. His operator was reporting. He did not need a computer to tell him the American was close. He could feel it in the vibrations of the deck plates. Rezai spoke to his executive officer. The American thinks we will dive deeper to let him pass. He thinks we are afraid of the deep water. The executive officer wiped sweat from his brow. He is a Los Angeles-class boat, Captain. He has twice our displacement. If we collide, we will not survive. We will not collide, Rezai said. He will turn. He has more to lose than we do. Maintain course. 60 meters depth. 2:33 in the afternoon. Back on the Hampton, the tension shifted from curiosity to professional concern. The two submarines were now less than 1,000 yards apart. In the world of underwater warfare, 1,000 yards is the equivalent of standing toe-to-toe in a dark room. The fire control technician spoke. Captain, I have a firing solution on the contact. I can transition to an active ping at any time. Miller shook his head. No. If we ping him, we are escalating this to a combat footing. We stay passive. We stay silent. The executive officer of the Hampton whispered to Miller, Sir, we are running out of sea room. The bottom is rising to our south. If we stay at 60 meters, we are going to be squeezed against the continental shelf. He knows that, Miller said. He is trying to force us into the rocks or force us to the surface, where his land-based aircraft can see us. 2:35 in the afternoon. The acoustic signature of the Yunes suddenly changed. The faint harmonic of the pump grew louder. Then, a new sound entered the water. It was a sharp, metallic clank. It was the sound of a torpedo tube outer door swinging open. On the Hampton, every sonar operator felt their heart rate spike. The sonar supervisor shouted, Contact is opening outer doors. Bearing 040. He is preparing to fire. Miller did not flinch. He is posturing. He wants us to hear it. Range is 800 yards, the supervisor said. 600 meters. He is coming right at our nose. The two steel predators were now so close that the electronic interference from their systems began to bleed into each other's sensors. The ocean was closing in. 2:37 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Hampton, the atmosphere shifted from observation to tactical engagement. The sound of the Iranian torpedo doors opening had been a clear signal. Commander Miller knew the rules of engagement. He could not fire unless he was fired upon, but he could not allow his ship to sit in the crosshairs of an adversary. Miller looked at the tactical display. Pilot, level at 60 meters. Increase speed to 10 knots. Left full rudder. Come to heading 310. The Hampton began to bank into a turn. The goal was simple. Miller wanted to put the Hampton behind the Yunes. Every submarine has a blind spot directly behind its propeller, called the baffles. If the Hampton could reach that position, the Iranian sonar would lose them in their own wake. The sonar supervisor spoke. Contact is responding. He is increasing his turns. He knows we are moving for his baffles. 2:39 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian submarine Yunes, the vibration of the American nuclear reactor was becoming a physical presence. It was a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate the very air in the command center. Captain Rezai felt the American boat accelerating. He knew the maneuver. He had practiced against his own fleet many times. Rezai grabbed the overhead rail. He is trying to get behind us. He wants to hide in our noise. Hard to starboard. Increase to maximum battery output. Do not let him find the angle. The Yunes was smaller and more agile than the American giant. It pivoted sharply in the water. The two submarines were now like two boxers circling each other in a ring of pitch-black water. The distance between them dropped to 400 meters. At this range, even a small navigational error would lead to a steel-on-steel collision. 2:41 in the afternoon. The ocean around them was no longer silent. The water was filled with the churning noise of two powerful propulsion systems fighting for position. On the Hampton, the sonar operators were struggling. The noise of their own high-speed turn was washing out the delicate signals of the Iranian boat. The sonar supervisor shouted over the noise of the cooling pumps. "Captain, we are losing the track. The acoustic wash is too heavy. He is turning inside our radius." Miller gripped the back of the pilot's chair. "How far?" "Range is 300 meters and closing. He is cutting across our bow." Inside the Hampton, the crew could hear it. A faint, rhythmic thumping. It was the sound of the Iranian propeller. It was not coming through the headsets anymore. It was coming through the hull. The two vessels were now so close that the physical displacement of the water from one ship was pushing against the other. Miller's jaw tightened. Steady as she goes. If he wants the lead, let him have it. But do not lose that solution. The tactical dance was becoming a death spiral. Both captains were committed. Neither would be the first to break the circle. 2:43 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. The Iranian submarine Yunes made its move. Captain Rezai knew he could not outrun the American nuclear vessel in a straight line. He chose aggression instead of flight. He ordered a snap turn to port. This was a high-risk maneuver, designed to put his bow and his torpedo tubes directly in the path of the approaching American hull. The Iranian boat groaned as the rudder hit the stops. The lead-acid batteries poured current into the electric motor. The vibration was intense. Inside the Iranian control room, the deck tilted sharply. Rezai gripped a brass handle. "Status of the American boat. Give me a bearing," the sonar operator shouted. "He is turning with us. He is trying to stay on our flank. Range is 250 meters, 2:44 in the afternoon." Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Hampton, the tactical display was a mess of overlapping lines. The sudden turn by the Yunes had created a knuckle in the water. This was a wall of turbulent bubbles that acted like a temporary acoustic shield. For 5 seconds, the Hampton was blind. The executive officer looked at Commander Miller. "Captain, he just pointed his nose at our midsection. He is in a firing position. According to the current rules of engagement, we have the authority to defend the ship if a launch is detected." Miller stared at the screen. He knew the pressure of the moment. One wrong command would start a war. "We do not have a launch signature. He is bluffing. He wants us to panic and surface. If we surface, he wins the tactical exchange." "Captain," the executive officer said, "he is within 200 meters. If he fires a wakehomer, we have less than 10 seconds of reaction time. We should preset the countermeasures." Miller nodded. "Launchers 1 and 2 to standby, but do not release. I repeat, do not release." 2:45 in the afternoon. The two submarines were now so close that the sonar operators on both ships could hear more than just engines. They could hear the internal mechanical clicks of the opposing vessel. On the Hampton, the sonar technician could hear the faint, rhythmic cycling of the Iranian air scrubbing system. It was a terrifying level of intimacy. The sonar supervisor spoke with a trembling voice. "Captain, contact is steady. On bearing 080. He has stopped his turn. He is sitting right there. He is waiting." Miller checked the depth gauge. "He is holding at 60 meters. We are at 60 meters. We are looking down the barrel of a gun." Pilot. "Very slow ahead. 1 knot. Let the current drift us. Do not give him a noise to track." 2:46 in the afternoon. Inside the Yunes, the Iranian crew was breathless. The American boat was so close that the magnetic signature of the Hampton was tripping the sensors. On the Iranian console, The magnetic anomaly detector was screaming a silent warning. There was a mountain of American steel just outside their thin pressure hull. Captain Rezai watched his depth gauge. He knew the American captain was a professional. He knew the American was likely waiting for him to make the first mistake. He looked at his weapons officer. The man's hand was hovering over the firing trigger for the number 1 torpedo tube. "Not yet," Rezai whispered. "We wait. Let him see that we do not blink." The two vessels were now effectively locked in a maritime standoff. Neither captain would order reverse. To reverse would be to lose the angle of attack. To go forward was to risk a collision that would crush both hulls like soda cans. The standoff was no longer about strategy. It was about nerves. 2:48 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. The distance between the USS Hampton and the Iranian submarine Yunes was now 100 meters. At this range, the massive displacement of water from the two hulls began to create a physical interaction. The Hampton felt a slight, rhythmic shudder. It was the bow wave of the Iranian vessel pushing against the American steel. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was cold, but the men were sweating. Commander Miller stood perfectly still. He watched the digital distance readout. It was counting down like a clock. 90 meters. 85 meters. The executive officer leaned in. His voice was a low whisper. "Captain, he is flooding his tubes. We can hear the high-pressure air. If he fires at this range, the torpedo will not even have time to arm its seeker. It will just be a kinetic impact. It will still sink us." Miller did not look away from the screen. He knows that. He is betting that we value our lives more than our position in this channel. He is trying to steer us like a sheep. "Sir," the sonar supervisor called out, "I have another sound. New contact. Bearing 000. Directly above us. It is massive. 2:49 in the afternoon. 2:49 in the afternoon." Inside the Iranian submarine, Yunes, the sound of the American reactor was no longer a hum. It was a roar. The acoustic energy was so intense that it was vibrating the light fixtures in the ceiling. The Iranian crew looked up. They could hear the faint, haunting groan of their own hull. The pressure of being sandwiched between the American submarine and the rising seafloor was starting to compress the metal. Captain Rezai felt the vibration in his teeth. He looked at his sonar operator. "What is that noise from above? Is it a helicopter?" The operator pressed his headsets into his ears. "No, Captain. It is too heavy. It is a supertanker. It is the Al-Malik. She is fully loaded. Her draft is at least 25 meters." Rezai felt a surge of adrenaline. A supertanker at 25 meters draft, combined with two submarines at 60 meters, meant the vertical space in the water column was disappearing. They were being squeezed from the top and the bottom simultaneously. 2:50 in the afternoon. On the Hampton, the tactical picture became a nightmare. The supertanker above was over 300 meters long. Its massive propellers were cavitation monsters. They created a blinding wall of white noise on the sonar screens. "We are losing him," the sonar supervisor shouted. "The tanker is washing out everything. I cannot tell where the Yunes is. He is somewhere in the noise." Miller gripped the armrests of Day, his chair. He is still there. He hasn't turned. He is using the tanker as cover. "Captain," the pilot said, "the bottom is coming up. Depth to the seafloor is now only 80 meters. We are at 60. The tanker is at 25. That leaves us 15 meters of clearance above and 20 meters below. We are in a tunnel." 2:51 in the afternoon. The two submarines were now less than 70 meters apart. They were moving bow to bow. Neither could see the other clearly through the acoustic storm of the tanker overhead. They were flying blind in a canyon of their own making. Inside the Yunes, Captain Rezai made the final commitment. He did not order a Knesset dive. He did not order a climb. He ordered the weapons officer to final standby. "If the American touches us," Rezai said, "you fire. Do not wait for my command. If there is a collision, you fire. The weapons officer gripped the launch trigger. His knuckles were white. The Iranian crew held their breath. They could hear the Hampton now. It was a deep, pulsing throb. It was right in front of them. The two ships were no longer just adversaries. They were two bullets traveling down the same barrel. The moment of impact was seconds away. 2:52 in the afternoon. The distance was 60 meters. 55, 50. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Hampton, the world narrowed to a single digital readout. The sonar screens were a flat wall of white static. The massive propellers of the supertanker Al-Malik overhead were creating an acoustic storm that blinded every sensor. The American crew was blind. They were flying by inertial navigation and raw nerves. The pilot's voice was a strained whisper. "Captain, 50 meters. Bearing is dead ahead. He is not turning. We are going to hit him." Commander Miller felt the vibration in the deck plates. It was not the smooth hum of his own nuclear engines. It was the massive displacement of the Iranian hull. It was the massive displacement of the Iranian hull. The water between the two ships was being compressed. It was becoming a physical wall of pressure that fought against the rudder. "Steady," Miller said. His voice was unnervingly calm. "Maintain depth 60 meters. Do not flinch. Do not give him the lane." 2:52 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian submarine Yunes, the sound was deafening. The roar of the tanker propellers overhead was a rhythmic hammer against the pressure hull. To the front, the American nuclear plant was a high-frequency scream that pierced through the metal. The sonar operator ripped his headset off. The acoustic energy was too high. He covered his ears. "Captain, he is on top of us! 45 meters! 40!" Captain Rezai gripped the brass periscope pedestal until his knuckles turned white. He could hear the Hampton's hull groaning through the water. It was the sound of two giants brushing shoulders in a pitch-black hallway. The Iranian boat rocked violently in the turbulence of the American bow wave. The Yunes was being sucked toward the larger American vessel by the Venturi effect. The physics of the ocean were trying to force a collision. "Fire control!" Rezai shouted over the mechanical roar. "Solution is point blank. Stand by to fire." The weapons officer had his thumb trembling on the launch trigger. One twitch, one reflex, 1 second of fear. That was all it would take to start a war that no one could stop. 2:53 in the afternoon. The distance was 30 meters. The bow of the Hampton and the bow of the Yunes were now passing each other in the dark. They were separated by less than the width of a two-lane road. The vibration was violent and mechanical. The Hampton heeled 5 degrees to starboard as the pressure wave of the Kilo-class boat hit the American sail. In the forward torpedo room of the Hampton, the sailors stood perfectly still. They watched the circular hull frames. They expected the steel to scream. They expected the black ocean to crush the compartment. The sound of the Iranian propeller was a physical thumping against the American hull. It sounded like a heavy heart beating against the side of the ship. Thump, thump, thump. The two submarines were now overlapping. 6,000 tons of American nuclear technology and 2,000 tons of Iranian diesel-electric power were inches from a catastrophe. Every man held his breath. Every heart stopped. The air in both submarines felt thick enough to choke on. The oxygen seemed to have vanished. In both command centers, the captains looked at their depth gauges. The tanker was still a ceiling of steel above them. The rocks of the shelf were a floor of granite below them. The adversary was a ghost in the white noise. The pressure was at the limit. 2:54 in the afternoon. The ceiling of the ocean began to fall. Above the two submarines, the supertanker Al-Malik experienced a catastrophic mechanical failure. A massive shuddering vibration traveled through the water as the tanker's main engine seized. The rhythmic thumping of its propeller stopped instantly. The sudden loss of forward momentum caused a phenomenon known as the squat effect. The massive stern of the tanker began to settle deeper into the water as the displacement caught up with the hull. The 25-meter draft of the tanker suddenly increased to 30 meters. The ceiling of the tunnel was no longer fixed. It was descending. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Hampton, the sonar supervisor shouted over the sudden change in acoustics. "Captain, the tanker is slowing. The blade rate has stopped. He is settling. The overhead clearance is dropping rapidly." Commander Miller looked at his depth gauge. He then looked at the sonar waterfall. The white noise of the tanker's propeller was gone. It was replaced by the terrifying sound of a 300,000-ton ship, groaning as its structure stressed. "Pilot," Miller said, "report depth to bottom." 75 meters, Captain. "The gap is closing. We have 15 meters of water above us and 15 meters below, and the Iranian is still on our port beam." 2:54 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian submarine Yunes, the silence following the tanker's engine failure was more terrifying than the noise. Without the propeller wash to hide them, the two submarines were now fully visible to each other's sonar. But they were also trapped. Captain Rizé looked at his own depth gauge. The Yunes was a smaller boat, but it lacked the precise buoyancy control of the American nuclear vessel. The turbulence from the slowing tanker was pushing the Iranian boat downward. The sonar operator pointed to the overhead. "Captain, the tanker's hull. I can hear the pressure. He is right on top of us. If we do not move, he will pin us against the sea floor." Rizé looked at the tactical plot. The American submarine was less than 30 meters away. They were overlapping. If either ship attempted to turn, their sterns would swing into each other. If they dived, they would hit the rocks. If they stayed, the Al-Malik would crush them both. "Signal the American," Rizé ordered. The executive officer stared at him. "Captain, we are in a tactical engagement. There is no engagement if we are all dead," Rizé said. "Use the underwater telephone, international frequency. Tell him we are going down. Tell him he must go down with us." 2:55 in the afternoon. On the USS Hampton, a haunting, distorted voice erupted from the communications speaker. It was the sound of an underwater telephone, a low-frequency acoustic radio. The voice was metallic and strained. It was speaking English. "American submarine. This is Yunes. The ship above is sinking into us. We must dive. We will move to 70 meters. Do not fire. We are moving now." The executive officer looked at Miller. "Sir, he's breaking the standoff." "He's not breaking it," Miller said. "He's surviving it. He's giving us a way out that doesn't involve a collision." "Sonar, do you see him moving?" "Confirmed, Captain. He is increasing his depth. He is dropping toward the shelf. He is giving us the room." Miller did not hesitate. The professional instinct of a mariner overrode the mission of the hunter. "Pilot, level at 70 meters. Match his rate of descent. Keep our nose exactly where it is. We are going to ride this out together." The two submarines, which seconds ago were prepared to destroy each other, began a synchronized descent. They moved as one unit, dropping toward the jagged granite of the sea floor, while the massive shadow of the Al-Malik settled into the space they had just occupied. The pivot had occurred. The hunt was over. The struggle for survival had begun. 2:55 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. The descent was a controlled fall into the dark. Inside the USS Hampton, every crew member felt the change in the deck angle. The submarine was heavy, but it was precise. At 72 meters depth, the massive hull of the tanker Al-Malik was still visible on the high-frequency sonar as a jagged, irregular ceiling. The tanker had stopped its downward drift, but it was now wallowing in the swells, its deep keel acting like a pendulum only 15 meters above the American sail. Commander Miller watched the depth gauge, 74 meters, 75. The sonar supervisor spoke with a forced calmness. "Captain, bottom is at 78 meters. We have 3 meters of water below the keel. The Iranian contact is still on our port beam. He is matching our depth exactly. His distance is 25 meters. Miller looked at the display. The two submarines were now so close that their acoustic signatures were merging into a single, massive blot on the screen. The physics of the situation were unprecedented. If one ship moved too fast, the resulting suction would pull the other into a collision. They were tethered by the very water they displaced. 2:56 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian submarine, Yunes, the stress was reaching a breaking point. The crew could hear the groan of the sea floor. The Gulf of Oman is not a flat desert. It is a landscape of silt and jagged rock pinnacles. The sonar operator was tracking a rock formation rising directly ahead of them. The sonar operator shouted, "Captain! Obstacle! Bearing 035. Height is 4 meters. We are going to strike the bottom." Captain Rezai did not hesitate. He knew he could not climb because of the tanker. He could only go around. Hard to port. Emergency flank power. The Yunes pivoted. Its tail swung toward the USS Hampton. In the confined space between the two ships, the sudden surge of water from the Iranian propeller acted like a physical blow against the American hull. 2:57 in the afternoon. On the Hampton, the ship rocked violently to the right. Sailors were thrown against bulkheads. In the Combat Information Center, the alarm for a hull breach sounded briefly before being silenced by a technician. It was not a breach, but the massive pressure spike of the Iranian maneuver. The executive officer grabbed a handrail. "He is turning into us. He is trying to ram." "Negative," Miller shouted. "He is avoiding the shelf." "Pilot, match his turn." "Hard to port." "Level at 75 meters." The two submarines executed a synchronized, high-speed turn in a space no wider than a football field. Their hulls were so close that the turbulent water between them began to cavitation, creating a screaming hiss that echoed through both ships. It was the sound of metal and water screaming under the weight of 10,000 tons of moving steel. 2:58 in the afternoon. The maneuver worked. Both vessels cleared the rock pinnacle by less than 5 meters. The Yunes and the Hampton were now side by side, heading away from the continental shelf and back toward the deep water of the Arabian Sea. The tanker Al-Malik was fading into the distance. Behind them, a silent and broken mountain of iron. The immediate threat of the surface collision was gone, but the tactical reality returned, with a vengeance. The sonar supervisor on the Hampton spoke up. "Captain, noise from the Yunes has changed. He is cycling his torpedo shutters. He is still in a firing solution, and now he has a clear line of sight to our midsection." Miller stood up. He looked at the weapons console. The green lights were still on. The tubes were still loaded. The Iranian captain had saved them from the tanker, but he had not lowered his guard. The two submarines were now clear of the obstacles, but they were still locked in a kill chain that neither side had the courage to break. The immediate threat of the tanker was fading. The threat of each other remained. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. The ocean floor dropped away rapidly as the two submarines moved into the deep water of the Arabian Sea. The depth was now 200 meters. The crushing pressure of the supertanker and the jagged rocks of the continental shelf were behind them. The two predators were finally in their natural element, but the tactical situation remained a razor edge. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Hampton, Commander Miller watched the range indicator. 70 meters. The two hulls were still parallel. They were two steel coffins moving in a silent formation through the dark. The sonar supervisor spoke. "Captain, the Yunes has not changed its bearing. He is still holding the solution. His torpedo doors are open. I can hear the flow noise across his tubes." Miller looked at his executive officer. The man's face was pale under the red tactical lights. The tension of the last 15 minutes had taken a physical toll on the entire crew. They had survived a collision by inches. Now they were waiting to see if the Iranian captain would finish what the ocean had started. "He could have fired when we were turning," the executive officer whispered. "He had the angle. Why is he waiting?" "Because he knows. We have the same angle," Miller said. "He is waiting for us to blink. He is waiting to see if we are going to hunt him or if we are going to go home." 3 o'clock and 5 minutes in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian submarine, Yunes, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of ozone and sweat. The battery levels were dropping. The high-speed maneuvers had drained their power reserves. Captain Rezai knew he could not sustain this standoff for much longer. He had to make a choice. He could fire and guarantee the destruction of his ship in the counterfire. Or he could trust the professional code of the man in the other hull. Rezai looked at his weapons officer. The man's finger was still on the trigger. "Close the outer doors," Rezai said. His voice was tired but firm. The weapons officer hesitated. "Captain? The American is still behind us." "Close the doors," Rezai repeated. "He saved us from the shelf as much as we saved him. The debt is paid. Give him the signal." The sound of the heavy steel doors swinging shut echoed through the water. It was a loud, rhythmic clanging. In the world of submarine warfare, it was the equivalent of holstering a weapon. 3:10 in the afternoon. On the USS Hampton, the sonar supervisor jumped in his seat. "Captain!" Acoustic transient from the contact. "He is closing his torpedo. Doors." Repeat. "He is closing his outer doors." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. It was almost audible over the hum of the electronics. Miller nodded. "Pilot, reduce speed to 3 knots. Come to heading 180. Let us give him the room he needs to head back to the Gulf." The Hampton began a slow, deliberate turn away from the Iranian vessel. By slowing down, Miller was intentionally giving up the tactical advantage. He was showing his back to the Yunes. It was a gesture of supreme professional trust. 3:15 in the afternoon. The two submarines began to separate. The distance grew from 70 meters to 500, then 1,000. The acoustic signatures faded back into the background noise of the busy shipping lanes. Inside the Yunes, Captain Rezai watched the American signature move south. He did not feel like he had lost. He felt like he had survived a ghost. He wiped the sweat from his eyes, looked at his crew. "Return to base," Rezai said, slow and quiet. "We have seen enough of the Americans for one day." In the deep water, the silence returned. The crisis had resolved not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, professional decisions. Two commanders who were supposed to be enemies had found a way to survive the same ocean. The morning was over. The line had been held. 6:30 in the evening. 200 nautical miles south of the Gulf of Oman. The USS Hampton was back in deep, open water. The nuclear reactor hummed with a steady, comforting rhythm. Inside the wardroom, Commander Miller sat alone with a cup of lukewarm coffee. The adrenaline of the afternoon had long since faded, replaced by a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. On the table before him was the rough draft of his patrol report. He struggled to find the right words to describe the 60 seconds, when 10,000 tons of American and Iranian steel had shared the same narrow corridor of salt water. Military reports are designed to be objective. They use cold language, like close aboard, and unintentional tactical convergence. But Miller knew that no report could capture the physical sensation of the Iranian bow wave hitting his hull. He knew it could not describe the sound of a human voice crackling over an underwater telephone in a moment of shared desperation. He picked up his pen and wrote a single sentence in the remarks section. The professionalism of the opposing commander prevented a localized incident from becoming a theater-wide conflict. 3 days later, the Pentagon, Washington, D. In a windowless room deep within the E-ring, a group of senior naval analysts gathered around a large digital map. They replayed the acoustic data recovered from the Hampton's black box. The room was silent as they watched the two digital icons overlap. On the screen, the distance dropped to 0. For a few heartbeats, the computer could not distinguish between the two vessels. A rear admiral leaned forward. How did they not touch? The lead analyst adjusted his glasses. The Venturi effect should have pulled them together. According to the physics, they should have collided. The only reason they didn't is because both captains recognized the danger of the sinking tanker simultaneously. They used their engines to push water between the hulls. They used the physics of the ocean to keep themselves apart. The admiral shook his head. And if one of them had panicked? If the Iranian had fired that Waycomer? Then we would be in a state of general war, the analyst replied. The margin for error was less than 5 meters. 5 meters was the difference between a routine patrol and a global catastrophe. 6 days later, Bandar Abbas Naval Base, Iran. Captain Rezai stood on the pier as the Yunes was secured to its moorings. The black rubber tiles of the hull were scarred and scraped from the turbulence of the encounter. There was no ceremony for his return. There were no medals. In the world of silent service, a job well done is a job that no one ever hears about. His executive officer stood beside him. "The Americans will increase their patrols now, Captain. They will be looking for us." Rezai looked out at the horizon. "Let them look. They know now that we are not just ghosts in the water. We are mariners. And in the dark, the ocean does not care about our flags. It only cares about our competence." Rezai walked down the gangway. He felt the solid earth beneath his feet, but his mind was still 60 meters down, in the cold and the dark. He thought about the American captain. He wondered if the man was also standing on a pier somewhere, looking at the same sea. They were enemies by decree, but for 1 minute, they had been the only 2 people on Earth who truly understood the price of a mistake. Strategic military analysis would later conclude that the encounter in the Gulf of Oman was a failure of maritime boundaries. They would call for more sensors and better communication. But the truth was simpler. Modern warfare is often defined by the technology of destruction, but it is ultimately governed by the restraint of the individuals who hold the keys. The most powerful weapon in the American or Iranian arsenal was not a torpedo or a nuclear reactor. It was the ability of a professional to look into the eyes of an adversary and choose a different path. The Gulf of Oman returned to its usual state of noisy, commercial chaos. The supertankers continued to lumber through the straits. The waves continued to crash against the jagged rocks of the shelf. Deep below, the path where the 2 submarines had danced was empty. The water had no memory of the steel that had passed through it. But history is not written in the water. It is written in the silence of the men who return home.